Hi, everybody. Today we're taking a look at Axis and Allies 1942 that came out in 2009. Specifically, we're going to cover Allied gameplay strategies for novice or rookie players. Novice or rookie players should probably play the bad guys with this setup to start, as it is immensely difficult to pull off a victory with the Allies against most players of the Axis that have any level of experience. But I maintain with proper discipline, anyone can win as the Allies if they adhere to at least a few fundamental gameplay principles that often reoccur in many versions of A&A. This is another one where you need, I think it's 9 victory stars to win. So I'd like to demonstrate one possible grand strategy an allied player can follow that might in fact be one of the best paths towards ultimate victory. Be advised, it's not easy. The game is going to be long if the allies do well, even more so than the original. And I'll take a minute to reference the physical game board version and explain why I'm using AAA software for this video. It's just easier and faster. The physical game board can get cramped. It's too small in my opinion. I liked it. I don't currently own a copy, but I like it enough that I'm going to look for a set online because I think it would make for a good mod video. I especially like the country-specific pieces. The overall initial balance of power and setup was all interesting. For the first time, it featured Germany at its high water mark, differently than the original, in that you know you're playing 1942, when advanced German units start the game right next to the Russia territory. I used air quotes there because you could make an argument that October 41 was the height of the German war effort. It hadn't gotten cold yet, at least in the beginning of the month, and the Germans were moving the entire front at that time before vile weather set in to freeze men and equipment. In 42, after the first winter, the Germans could only push in the south towards the Caucasus, which led to the Stalingrad disaster, as we all know. So whatever. 42, it's still a really bad situation. It's critical for the good guys. So what can we do as the Allied player? First, and by the way, I'm talking about general strategies, not turn-by-turn statistical breakdown of odds and potential set-piece battles. There are a lot of other people online who are way better at that type of thing than I am. I'm old school. I go by gut instinct mostly. As the Russians, first you need to protect the 2 airplanes you start with, the 2 Sturmovik air groups. They are irreplaceable, worth their weight in gold. You can't risk them unnecessarily, ever. Don't use them attacking if there is even a small chance you'll lose them. That's number 1. Number 2, you have to trade space for time with the USSR. In Axis and Allies, this means spoiling attacks over and over and over again, which I'll try to demonstrate with this playthrough. You need to take back lost territories with the absolute least amount of units. Never do all-out counterattacks into territories that will in turn be ambushed by the Germans. That's precisely how the Soviet Union loses this game. These moves only wind up being traps in the end. Even Stalin learned this lesson. I read that even in the darkest hour, he held back at least 400 tanks inside Moscow, even when they could have been rushed to the front lines. So stockpile, just as the Russians did. Finally, never leave a territory open, even in an emergency. Always 1 infantry per territory minimum. Comrade, kill your German. That's what they used to say on the front. That's how you do it here. Moving on to the British side. I build a factory in India on the first turn. I stack India with everything I can. I refuse to give up India at all. My mindset is I can't lose it no matter what. Sacrifice as much as possible to save it for as long as possible. India can be viable in this game if the British player pours resources into it every turn. It's the best way to stymie the Japanese player. In fact, they have to somehow take India, fight off the American Pacific Fleet, and pressure the Russians in the east. And you'll find that this set of tasks is beyond the industrial capacity of the Empire of Japan. Japan will buckle and collapse under these pressures eventually. In Europe, the British have to destroy everything German that moves on or under any ocean as quickly as possible. Transports are 0-0 attack defense in this game. They can't soak hits, so anything that can threaten them must be wiped out. The 2 German transports also must be destroyed ASAP because they ferry German units to Africa or the Eastern Front. So it's very, very important that they sink as quickly as possible. As far as where to land in amphibious invasions in the West, it's Western Europe, no exception, unless it's impossible for some unfortunate set of circumstances. Not Scandinavia. Force the Germans to attack in the opposite direction of the Eastern Front. They must be forced into a true two-front war as early as possible. So trade Western Europe every turn if need be. It's so destructive long-term for the Germans to constantly have to retake France. With America, I depart a little from the actual historical narrative here in that I prefer to throw most of my weight as the US against the Japanese, at least until the IJN is scattered or completely destroyed. So every turn aircraft carrier and 2 planes in the Pacific until it's no longer necessary. I use the Solomon Islands springboard attack plan. It's strategically located, although not worth anything from a production standpoint. From there, you may strike right into the heart of the Japanese East Asian co-prosperity sphere. In fact, as the American player, you might expect to encounter the most desperate, even suicide attacks from here, because a Japanese player has to know that Borneo and the other big money spaces, islands, are all vulnerable from this launching off point. And it's just one turn sailing from Hawaii to get to the Solomon Islands. So almost immediately, the Americans can threaten Japan's life if they choose to focus most of their power in the Pacific. On the first turn, I landed in Africa with the U.S. starting forces, sacrificing the 2 transports to do so in most cases, because I don't want to give up all of Africa, since the British are more concerned with propping up India. So I'll just turn to the game here, focus more on the game. And so let's see what we have here. So you can see you get Pearl Harbored often as the allies. Most human players will do this too. Computer does it. Nothing you can do about it really. Sometimes if people get over aggressive, they forget, like the computer did, that their transports are vulnerable. They have to hang one up north, so you can always be sure to sink any of those targets of opportunity. I don't actually let that bother me. Pearl Harbor is just a temporary setback in this game, just as it was in real life for the Americans. In this game, America has the production capacity to make good those losses on the very next turn, which I do. So yeah, here's they're almost sacrificial one-way transports to get the Americans into Africa. And this is probably the only time during the game that you'll see me willing to do this. It's just really important to not lose all of Africa at the beginning, since I have dismantled its eastern defenses in favor of propping up India, which is the linchpin of the Allied grand strategy here, the winning one in my opinion. So let's see, we get the transport for free. The computer should realize that managing transports is almost everything in this game. It's too expensive to be constantly replacing them. But here you go with the American reconstruction program of the Pacific Fleet. Just carriers, fully equipped, every turn, with the loose change going to the Eastern Front. seems to work in this version of Axis and Allies. With the Russians, I typically build mostly men, not always just men if I can afford a tank in there. Very important to be able to strike back and do the pinprick spoiling attacks, especially in the Far East. And you can see the beauty of building a factory with the British in India on the first turn. It severely restricts Japan's options. They must match that show of force in French Indochina, I believe it is, the neighboring territory. This will consume almost, well, probably a third or between a third or half of their economy just dealing with this British threat. And what's the other half doing? It's not enough to match American Pacific Fleet builds. It could be spent on a small-scale offensive in the Far East against the Russians, but then you give the Americans a free hand in the Pacific. So as long as you do these two important things with the Allies, I feel the Japanese are really over a barrel right from the beginning of the game. And they're scary buff in this game too. Like they can smack China right off the face of the earth, usually, without little trouble. I mean, come on. But I've made previous videos about that. Still, you can see they're contained by the Russians already, and they are forced to respond in kind in Indochina with a factory. They're behind one turn, basically, doing that. So like they're perpetually trying to match what the British can build. It's not so simple just for them to rush everything they have to take it back immediately, because they're going to have the Americans right behind them. And even the Russians from the Caucasus in an emergency, I would move them down there to save India if I had to, if at all possible. I'm aggressive with the Indian Ocean fleet there too. I will probably lose it here. Yeah, that was probably an error in judgment. But I want to try to eliminate any ability of the Germans to move resources or our men by sea. Like that, they'll either move men right into Africa or out east in those ships, and you can't have that. You have to destroy the German ships as soon as possible. Any way that you can. It's worth it in the long run. I'm not sure it's worth sacrificing it out, like all my naval assets in the Indian Ocean. But if it costs German planes or some of their offensive power, any sort of distraction from the Russian front on the part of the British in that area of the map is productive. Computer, I'm not sure if your human opponents are so aggressive with the Axis that they continually evacuate Western Europe and go all out in the East to try and end the war early. Computer does this all the time. I don't do this. I usually, as if I'm playing the Germans, I'll leave like at least a token. I don't give anything for free. It is a legit strategy early on if you're, as the Axis player, know that the Allied player can't move tons of assets into Western Europe, or at least more than you can immediately destroy in a counterattack. It gets to be extremely problematic, that strategy, later in the game. But as you can see, turn 2, turn 3, it's not such a concern for them. Since I already have Western Europe, I may as well take Norway. But I wouldn't do that if Western Europe wasn't already temporarily in my possession. It's always scary for the Allied player, especially on the Eastern Front. Like, it looks scary. The Germans can mobilize a lot of tanks, but going before the Germans as the Russians makes all the difference. And you can spoil those mass army groups even by attacking and causing all like casualties to their infantry, as long as you have more assets in the territory immediately behind the site of the battle. Because the next time they attack without infantry support, like maybe all armor or planes, it's going to be so costly. Yeah, you always do this as the British. It's, of course, the German player will take those back, but every single piece used to do that is not fighting on the Eastern Front. So it's acceptable. Annoying, yes, but believe me, it's more annoying for the German player. You know, it's just a sickening feeling playing Axis and Allies as the German player, and you have like no ships, and any type of action meant to disrupt the transport of units across the English Channel, you know, entails you losing aircraft. It's just, you know, you start making even more reckless gambles in the East to make up for an inability to stem the tide in the West. A lot of concentration of German armor in Army Group South and North, not so much in Belorussia in the center, depleted already. Some people, as the Allies, they invest heavily in strategic bombing, even early. I think it may be preferable in this version of ANA to sort of slowly ramp up to that strategy. Certainly not before you have a foothold in Western Europe and India is secure. Like, you are not immediately worried that it's going to fall to the Japanese. But yeah, it's harder than most people think for the Japanese player to snuff India in this version of ANA if the British play their cards right, and you know, give them support with potential support with the Americans and Russians even. So you can see with this strategy, it is fair to conclude that an early defeat is fought off, but as of yet, no sign of victory, of course. But if you play this way, I just don't see how even an expert Axis player will, you know, bully or run over even a novice or rookie player as the Allies. So there is some, hopefully I'm demonstrating some value to this sort of strategy. And I don't want mean to say that, this is a hack or, it's going to work every time. There's a lot of dice in this game. And when I was like preparing for this video, the AI was able to beat me several times until I thought like I had to really sort of think about what was happening as an old school player. It's still hard for me to get used to the 0-0 transports, the cheap subs in this. There are only 6 IPCs. They defend with a 1, attack at a 2, can't be approached with airplanes unless there's an enemy destroyer. I really like that. That's a cool rule. But all of those sort of nuances and changes, I have to refresh myself. But yeah, this was the first computer version of AAA Axis and Allies that like kicked my butt several games before I got to this point. I didn't know what was going on. It's like, but that's the advantage I feel that humans have over AI, and you can adapt to anything given enough time. So you have the counterattack in northern Africa, Algeria to Libya. Very important to do this. Like I said, the first turn for the Americans, I feel their units should actually fight in Africa. Anything after that, yes, you can prop Western Europe, but you cannot surrender the whole continent of Africa. It's too many IPCs for the British. I don't think there's any victory stars down there, but it doesn't, you have to fight the Germans there and defeat them as quickly as possible, in my opinion, anyway. I don't care. I'm not giving up. What is it? 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know. Maybe 10 IPCs total. That's a huge difference maker. So I'm in the dangerous waters of the Solomons with the Americans. Will be attacked. Any human player or computer player should realize that that's like a critical sea space, maybe even the most important sea zone in this version of Axis and Allies, actually. Usually the Japanese in this game have enough power to conduct their raid in Pearl Harbor, and then maybe 1 or 2 counterattacks into the Solomons, and that's it. Then they will be exhausted, unless they want to give up all of mainland Asia in order to match my spending. So in the Pacific, they run out, just like what happened in real life. They had Coral Sea, Midway, Solomons, and maybe Santa Cruz and Leyte Gulf, and that was it. And late in the last, Philippine Sea, a lot of these engagements were absolute slaughters because the Japanese had run out of experienced pilots. But anyway, we have a counterattack on the Eastern Front in the center. The way I like to set up Russian counterattacks is to always be mindful of what can hit them on the very next turn. And you also, the way you choose which territory to take is the way the territories are broken up, you can sort of cut off other tanks from joining in devastating potential counterattack. That's what I do. So, and you can see my planes are never exposed to anti-aircraft guns. They are never exposed to a situation where they can be destroyed in the first round of combat. Can you fly in tons of American and British aircraft to support, or fighters to support Russia, as you can in other versions of Axis and Allies? Yes. However, I don't need to do that in this grand strategy, it seems. If you do that, they could wind up being fairly like dead units, like they just sit there and sit there and sit there and do nothing. I think if you play the Russian power in this game efficiently, that strategy is not required. You may plop down fighters into India. I think that's fine because you're just in basically an arms race with the nose to nose with the Japanese down there, and you want to be as strong in defense as possible. So I think that's acceptable. Flying them right into Russia, I don't think is required in this scenario. Yet you can see already, like the Japanese are in a jam because if they misjudge an attack into India, they could be wiped out, and that's the end. And you can see the computer is not willing to take those risks because it can only go by odds, and if the odds aren't right, then it will choose to build and build and build and to sort of match your production, and it's just kind of a stalemate, which is fine because it's the Axis that have kids dread the grains of sand through the hourglass. It's the Allies that time is on their side, you can say, because they make more money. So I've got to split it's got the Kursk bulge there on the Eastern Front. Maybe not, it's too early for that. Germany still has teeth. But you can see, sure, they can take the Caucasus, but what's going to happen to any unit that remains there? It's going to be crushed the very next turn. So see if the computer can do the same thing to me, just do a spoiling attack. That's really bad to have airplanes take out my transports. But what are you going to do? They spent their Air Force in the West, which is okay, I guess, from a Russian standpoint. Germany to Western Russia. Caucasus. See, yeah, they only attacked with a token force. It was smart. They risked a plane, though, to do it. But that is the type of thing an experienced human player would do, also, as the Axis. So it can be kind of demoralizing playing this as the Allied player because you can see the map state. It's, you have a lot of gray there, and you have, after the Germans turn, like they're right up to the border of the Russian territory, but the Nazis in this game fall in sections, and you can see it. I mean, the first thing to go is the ships. They're not coming back. The Air Force gets thinner over time, and then there's less tanks, and then less artillery, and then the very front gets patchier and patchier. It's not a continuous line, and you just get pockets of resistance, and then it's just men, and then you can say that the Germans are truly on life support at that moment. In fact, if I get to a situation in this playthrough where I feel like either I or the Axis are in a non-recoverable position, I'll fast forward the playthrough, because I mean, we all know what happens. Like, it's, in theory, it's nice to imagine, you know, magical die rolls that somehow turn the tables. That can happen short term usually, but to have some type of Disney magic, you know, that would be like going to the casino and beating the house long term. You know, it's just, if you're overmatched with numbers and odds, there will be no Disney magic in a casino or in a game of Axis and Allies, as I have never seen a bunch of forest animals break out in song and dance, or a wooden boy come to life. I have never seen Germany in a condition of all-out defense, buying men, turn the tables. It doesn't happen. In fact, as soon as they lose their air force, it's a lost cause. Although it's very difficult to convince human players, and when they're playing the Axis, that, you know, whatever. Fun game though. Like I said, it is a long one, and that's why I feel like mods could really help this version. You may introduce really cool technologies or any sort of unstabilizing elements to this game. Anything really might help with the game length. Maybe politics rules, a la The World at War by Xenogames or something like that. There are people too that have made like a 1939 version with this map. I want to try it. I want to get the game and do a mod video. So it's on my long-term to-do list. So we have the Americans still advancing in Africa. The few German units are now trapped in the western half of sub-Saharan Africa. Only 2 territories left. That will be the last German military units to set foot on that continent. If I have anything to say about it. They still have a transport. See, I forgot about that. That one is the southern one. I guess represents like Italian units. Anyway, they can hide right in the, you know, Black Sea. I guess that is the Black Sea. And hard to get to. But you have to try. You have to keep the pressure up. You can see the Japanese are spread thin as well. They can match the British production in India and offer token pressure on the Eastern Front only. They can't also fight off the Americans in the Pacific indefinitely. Like I said, they have 1 or 2 large counterattacks, and after that their resources are spent, and it's something they have to effect some sort of miracle reversal in Southeast Asia on the continent, take India somehow, or pray that Russia collapses. upon itself, like around the Russian physical territory. But in this game, they're not going to get much help from Germany. Like, those spoiling attacks by the Russians are the answer, in my opinion. It is very difficult to learn how to play that way because most people are just cannot resist the temptation to push everything they can forward as fast as possible. But that does not work in this game, and it did not work historically all the time. What that typically results in is winning at the absolute maximum cost to yourself, if you're lucky. So by playing this way as the Russians, you can sort of imagine that you're evacuating the 1,500 factories or whatever they did from west to east, and you're reconstructing a new war industry in the Urals, while like your country's on a total war footing. Every citizen, man, woman, and child is, sacrificing everything. Even when the industrial and agricultural heart of your country is ripped out, it seems. I mean, the Germans advanced, it was 600 miles into Russia, all of the Ukraine and stuff like that. But, like I said before, the Russians and Stalin were at least wise enough to hold stuff in reserve, even in the darkest hours of October 41, even trying to take back Stalingrad. They were holding a lot back and just using barely what they needed to maintain those situations until they were ready to launch something like truly overwhelming. And you have to play that way. You have to use your imagination a little bit, but it's you can sort of get the feel. The Russians have full counteroffensive now. Center, north, and south, pushing the Germans backwards. Always mindful of protecting those fighters. They are nowhere near the anti-aircraft guns of the Caucasus. I have at least 6 divisions always in Russia as a sort of a safety valve or a fail-safe. Some, like other people in this situation right there, they would be just push everything forward. But that's not how you play. If you want to win, in my opinion, you'll just get counterattacked and smashed easily. It's amazing how durable the Russians are in this game if you can finesse the Eastern Front. But the same is also true for the Germans. They are incredibly difficult to break down. But it happens slowly, eventually. See, the Far East is still stable. The Japanese are involved in matching my build up in India, which consumes a lot of their industrial might. Yes, they can, like I said, they have about enough resources to, like they did, they counterattacked me in Solomons. It's to be expected, but how many more times can they do that? I don't see any naval aircraft anymore, fighters. Many of their surface ships are now scattered. So they can do that like maybe one or two times. But they cannot replace their losses as readily as the Americans can, just as it was in real life. It's amazing China hasn't been smacked off the map yet. But this is just one example of how difficult you can make life for the Japanese player by adopting this India first strategy. And I honestly think that a highly skilled player of Japan could, in fact, take India back. But if they did, then they would hand the Americans Borneo, Philippines, and Celebes, or whatever the other one is. 443 for a 3. There's no way that Japan could do both. They do not have the ability to push the Russians back, overwhelm a stockpiling India, and fend off a resurgent U.S. Pacific fleet if the Americans are dedicated to rebuilding their losses every single turn. It is impossible for the Japanese player to do that. They simply do not have the IPC count. So you can really exploit that as the Allied player. East Indies or whatever, yeah. Celebes in other games. Yeah, it's the Germans are still around, but I think the game, if you'll notice, if you play this version of Axis and Allies a lot, there's the game usually comes to a head around turn 7-ish, and no doubt, like the game, there'll be moments when it's very stressful for the Russian player because the German player will be faced with a do or die situation around that time. And I mean, who knows? Like anything could happen if you throw caution to the wind and are willing to potentially lose the game on one single mitt full of die rolls. That can happen. But all is still not lost if that does happen, because the British should have a lot of units in India, so they might be able to liberate Russia if in a worst case scenario. But it's usually never that simple. Like if the German player chooses to make that type of choice, it's usually at unfavorable odds. So I mean, what can you do? Like anyone could be beaten by miracle die rolls. I'm just saying the odds are the computer won't do that. But I don't know. I haven't played a lot of. I can't remember the last time I actually played this on a physical game board. I believe I think it was a multiplayer one where I may have only been one part of the Axis, I believe. This was another one of these boxes that my friend bought. One of those guys that just had to have everything before everyone else. So, okay, we'll play on. There's no point in me buying it. So, but I don't know. I still want to get this one, and I want to get Europe. I loved Europe when it came out, and both this and Europe, I think, would take very well to mods, and I want to make a mod video of both of those eventually. Anyway, with America, like I said at the outset, if you get stung by the Japanese in the Pacific, then it is an aircraft carrier and 2 planes. That's the winning formula as far as I'm concerned. If you already have the planes, then just the carrier off the West Coast. And I'd like to see Japan match that and deal with India and push the Russians at the same time. It's not happening. It's going to be the end of the Germans in French Equatorial Africa here coming up. They've got one armored division in Western Africa, and that will be it. That'll be a wrap. They have ships, the Italian ships, I don't think will last unless they flee. That's why I moved planes down to Gibraltar. Yeah. French West Africa is the last holdout of the Germans' Africa Corps. And you can see the Japanese are starting to make some progress, limited progress in East Asia, but not in force. Certainly nothing that the Russians can't snipe and stall out with counterattacks. The main threat, once again, is the Eastern Front, but once again, because Russia goes first in a turn order, see if you pick one of these zones, this is probably like the most critical phase in the entire game. If you take back West Russia here, then you strand everything in Karelia. Well, no, that's not true. Well, yes, it is. They can't, all those tanks can't get to Russia in a counterattack, so it's going to be just what you see in the Ukraine, which is not enough to take Russia. So it looks ominous, but if you, like I said, you manage your resources carefully on the Eastern Front, you can hang in there. It's surprising. There we go. Clipped the Japanese north of Manchuria. So the east is secure. Far east, they got a ton of men in western Russia. Will the Germans target that huge concentration of infantry? Or choose to attack the Caucasus? We'll see. That's a very, very difficult choice. They may not even be strong enough. One bad die roll. So you can see the stress is starting to build on the German war machine there. There's maybe the Air Force is reduced by 4/5. They do not have any type of navy. Their tanks are becoming less numerous. They just lost their bomber. And now the British, they get to choose what they want to do to... I always think I make the decision with India first. I always say, look at that part of the map. What do I need so it doesn't fall easily? And then with the change, I decide what's going on the transports across the English Channel. So you can see, like, the Eastern Front, it's pretty thin for the Germans, although they have massed, 11 tanks, but that's 2 turns away, and it doesn't have infantry support. So although it is very scary and intimidating, in reality I would have 2 builds at least before that would ever get to where it is it plans on going. There's a edit there because I just saved it. Took a break. Moving planes all around Africa. German armor in French West Africa is hopelessly stranded. That plane that came up from Australia had sunk a Japanese transport. So it's coming back home. So I'd like to know if you leave in the comments if you are the German player. Are you like the computer? You leave the Western Europe open if you can calculate that you can safely take it back? Or do you always leave sort of a token force in there, at least make the Allies fight for it? It's weird. It seems to be weird since the computer is unwilling to take the critical leaps of faith and gamble on huge potential game-breaking battles, but they do leave territories open. Why? You would think to facilitate bigger risks, but it's not the case. Could use a bomber for the Americans. That's stuff the Axis powers can't afford to build. Look how fast the American Navy bounces back. It's ready for a third or a second thrust. Completely reformed. And I don't see Japanese aircraft helping out this time. So if they are able to force another confrontation in the Solomons, it will be the last time they are able to do this. And then the door will be wide open for the American Navy. They're just not rebuilding their stuff like I am. So, I mean, what's the logical result, right? Match me with naval construction and hand me Indochina and the Kuomintang Army. So that's why I argue for the whole India gambit. It will be interesting to see how the Germans approach the Eastern Front, though, with a large concentration of armor. I don't think I'll be able to come up with a distraction big enough in the West for it to change direction, but we'll see. Yeah, I could see another Japanese counterattack, but like I said, if that does happen, it's the last one. It's their Leyte Gulf. Could they do it? Yeah, they could. They could do it actually, but like I said, they won't have any organized navy after that, in my opinion. Which then in turn opens up Kwangtung, Manchuria, all of the Philippines. So pick your poison, Japan. What are you going to do? German front's actually at an impasse right now, I would say. But we'll see. It all depends. It depends on that last concentration of German armor there, those 11 divisions of tanks. America. Oh, that was Russia. Yeah, you don't want to see the Japanese bombing Russia. That's not a good sign. But you can see the cracks appearing in the Far East, so I can drive my tank down in Manchuria, take Kwangtung. Of course, it's temporary, but you take the money for the Allies. That's worth it. I trade a tank for that any day. That's time. Once again, trade space for time always. Take care of that other threat in Xinjiang with tank and two planes. There's no danger to the aircraft doing that, even if the tank dies. That attack vector is stalled out unless I get horribly unlucky. I can push back every sector of the front. Archangel, Belorussia, Caucasus. However, there is a gigantic concentration of armor in the Ukraine without infantry support, but still you have to be mindful of that. So I guess you can. I'm at the point now where an all-out offensive must be taken into consideration. still left units back, but you could present the German player with huge problems at this point. You could see the front has buckled. So the Germans have to be careful of what they do with those 11 tanks. If they rush it ahead, then the counterattack will hit it from all sides, right? It's just the same situation faced by the Russians. I'm not sure how the computer will respond to this. It should be smart enough to not just charge those tanks forward, because it will just be swarmed and overwhelmed by a counterattack if it does so. But we'll see. It's actually super interested to see what the Germans do here with those tanks. A lot of first-time players would just charge them into the Caucasus. I say that would be a losing strategy, but we'll see. Because you can never forget that you plop down more units at the end of your turn. So the Russian player is stronger than you think. So what will the Germans do here? This is the question. So they split it up. And they got good results in south, center, and the north, actually. That was a good move by the Germans. However, I suspect they're going to leave a ton of tanks hanging. 7, at least maybe 7 target divisions exposed. Good move. Good move. Am I worried as the Russians? A little bit. That was better. The computer did a better job than I thought. 4 in the Caucasus. Whoever that is within reach of India, the British may lend a hand here. That's another reason why you build in India. 4, yeah, look at those tanks exposed in Western Russia. 4, 8. And if I do take back Western Russia, then that eliminates the 3 tanks from Belarus from attacking right into Moscow and Karelia. So it looks like that's going to be the move. The British, meanwhile, can play the harassing game on the Western Front. The reason why I'm going to Norway is because I think I have American units that can take Western Europe off the coast of Africa. So we'll present the Germans with multiple threats on the Western Front. I finally get bombs on the German transport in the Black Sea or whatever it is. That's very important. Like I said, you can't, those ships either move men to Africa or to the Eastern Front in the south. And typically, most players of the Axis will not bother spending any money on naval units after their initial forces are destroyed, since the Eastern Front is such a beast to have to feed and maintain. Anyway, the British players should be set up in such a way as to, you know, immediately attack and destroy any ships that the Germans plan on building anywhere. They should have planes within reach. So you can see, like it does. The Eastern Front I mean, it's scary. There's advanced German units right next to Russia, but I still have that reserve there. It's not going to be 8 tanks. It's going to be 4 or whatever, 4 less than what you see, and a lot more infantry in Russia by the time the Germans get to go again. Or less. Four, 5. It won't be enough, in my opinion. They just 7, 4, 4. Yeah, I'll be able to survive, I think, another turn if I do this right with Russia. Take West Russia. I can use my airplane safely. Move 7 units in there. The West is going to be in Western Europe now, too, in a meaningful way for the first time. That's a problem for the Germans. In fact, they may even have to turn some of those tanks west. That could actually happen here. Yeah, they might have to do that. Because the men aren't enough to take those territories back. So they won't be after America deploys in there. That's not good, having the Japanese bomb the Russians. It looks like the Japanese are preparing for their final battle in the Pacific Ocean. They're fueling up the Yamato for its one-way trip right now. You guys have to watch that movie. You just YouTube the battle scene where the Yamato gets sunk. I'm not sure, it's not a Hollywood movie, but oh my gosh, wow. That's a crazy movie. Just the end where the ship sinks. Yeah, see, there goes Borneo. That's a huge loss for the Japanese. They have to attack. This is like whatever they have that works has to be spent here now. So I predict that my ships will be lost. They will take losses, but I will have Borneo. And who knows, you might see a factory there next turn. What's Japan going to do to stop it? Nothing. They don't have transports. And if they want to spend money on transports, then they could kiss Indochina goodbye. So where were the Americans? This is a turning point, actually. We're getting close to a non-recoverable position, I think, for the Axis. They're not going to ever get back into Africa. More and more equipment and men are flowing into Western Europe. Sure, the Germans are strong enough to launch them out every turn, barely, but it's not cheap anymore. It's too costly to do that and maintain the Eastern Front properly. Like, they can deploy tanks, but they're unsupported, so that's a recipe for a disaster, in my opinion. They'll usually be lost in one cataclysmic battle, and if it goes horribly wrong, it'll just, the whole front will collapse for the Germans. I don't think they're even or they won't be powerful enough to go all or nothing against Russia after the Russian player goes. They will not have enough units, in my opinion. So, yeah, I can see Japan attacking that. But they can't get Borneo back. So they will have to spend the rest of their priceless naval assets in one last ditch effort to temporarily stave off the inevitable, it looks like. But that's bad. See, there's just nothing to follow that strategic bombing up, though. It's just these sort of piecemeal one-offs. Set piece reversals that the Axis can affect, but it's not enough to turn the tide. I'm going to have to film this in 2 parts, I think, because my batteries for my laptop's running out. So the conclusion will probably be inside. But yeah, here we have the counterattack in Western Russia. This should not be a problem. It isn't. It was a one-shot, 4 or 5. The Germans will not be strong enough to end Russia here. Even next turn they will be able to build in the Caucasus, but they have a big problem on the Western Front now. Or they will have. Because they won't know which way to turn. It's actually getting windy too, so you might be able to hear that interference. It wasn't supposed to be. It's a big counterattack, east and west. Very successful counterattack in the west. They were successful in the east as well, but they lost most of their infantry support. Tanks will be exposed again. So they're going to be left with 6, 7. So less than every turn. And they have units close enough to the British in India, so they're going to lend a hand now as well. So that's another problem for the Germans. They will have to deal with direct support on the Eastern Front from the British. That is very bad development. Is this non-recoverable? It's getting close. I'm going to finish this video off at home just because I ran out of battery. So, see you in a bit. And we're back at home where I can plug back in. So, we continue the story. Where we left off, just get the camera. There we go. So we have the British here. Don't have much to land in Western Europe. One measly artillery, but it's going to go in Eastern Europe. All of these little pinpricks in the west help, even though the big show is on the Eastern Front still. We have America entrenched in Borneo. I'm going to attack into Persia from India to help relieve some of the pressure off the Russians on the Eastern Front. Successful. No, that was pretty disappointing turn for the British. But it did take care of at least one tank that could reach potentially Russia by Germany's next attack east. It's without dismantling the bulk of India's defenses here. India is still more than a match for the Japanese in French Indochina, which is all that matters, but so you have a huge setback in the Pacific Ocean off the shores of Borneo. That was extremely, well, 4 hits. Yeah, I should have had more. I should have done a lot more damage to the Japanese Navy. But they do not have transports, and Borneo is safe. But I will have to restart the process of rebuilding the American Pacific Fleet for a 3rd time. And I will do that. The difference is I have a base right in the heart of Japan's supposed sphere of influence. So I will have fighting units in action faster. And I doubt, honestly, that the computer will devote all its resources to taking that back. That would mean losing ground in Southeast Asia, and they can't afford to do that because if Indochina were to fall, then that would be probably the end of the Japanese war effort, to be honest. All of the other territories on the mainland would just fall like dominoes. And there's still remnants of the American Pacific Fleet, so I may as well just take, what was that? New Guinea, I guess. It's worth a point. They're not going to get that back before I have fresh units there. I mean, they could. Well, no, it's not as simple as just building transports out of Indochina because I'm stacking India with ground units, so they cannot risk losing that standoff there. But I do think it's getting close to the end. The Japanese are just caught in a horrific dilemma. They cannot expand easily. Even that one spectacular, battle is a victory. Let's be honest. I didn't think I'd lose that badly with the American Pacific Fleet this late in the game, but will it reverse the overall flow and momentum of the game? I don't think so. They would have to have forces immediately available to follow that up, and they do not have the transports. So yeah, I will be able to build a power base right out of Borneo, as crazy as it sounds. And continuously attacking the Germans in Western Europe with the Americans as well. It's amazing that they can do two things. It's going to be, well, I want to have more stuff going in there for next turn. As far as Russia is concerned, 6 German tanks, 7, 8, 9 into Russia. That's if I cannot take back one of those, either this, no, well, it's not going to be in the north, but I have the option of striking back in the center or south. Center's tough. It's 6 tanks. But it's just 6 tanks. This is the key moment here where I might have to go all out to deal with the last gasp of the German army, the final threat. I don't think that the Germans will be able to mobilize that many tanks again for the remainder of the game. So if I go all out here, that would strand the tank in Karelia. That would just strand the tank in Karelia. Was it a good first? Well, see, there you go. They don't, without infantry reports, going to be costly, but they're going to lose their 6. Yeah. And I will have enough. They will only be able to attack into Russia with 3 tanks, 2 men, and an artillery. So 3 tanks, 2 men, and artillery versus 7 men, a tank, and 2 planes. So it was close, but I had it. I had that counterattack. And I have 6 tanks, 2 men with and some aircraft, British aircraft in an emergency. The Germans did not choose to risk going into Russia. If that, if they had chosen to go into Russia and would have lost, they would have had literally nothing left on the Eastern Front. So they did do the right thing. It's kind of spread out their attack, but they're almost doing what Russia's doing now, just playing for time that they don't seem to have. 2 tanks, 5, see, 6, potentially 7 armor, but yeah, here comes the British counterattack right into the Caucasus. So, and now it's going to be 8 men every turn. I have to build 2 more transports, it looks like. But after this turn, it'll be 8 men. Since the Germans do not have a air force anymore. Oh, they have 1 plane, but it's not enough to take down a battleship. They literally have, their air force is decimated, so they can't really stop the buildup that's going to be happening in the west. Germans came closer than I thought, though, on the Eastern Front. It's hairy, but oh, that was a terrible roll by the Germans. And now they cut off a piece, a quarter of the Germans on the Eastern Front are cut off in Kazakhstan now, thanks to the British exploding out of Persia. I think we're about 1 turn away from this getting out of hand for the Axis. Germany spread too thin, and they're going to struggle just to get back things that are falling in the west after this next turn, because I'll have the ability to move 8 guys every turn on the Western Front. So the Japanese can build factories in Manchuria all they want. American ships are going to be coming from Borneo, not Western United States now. So I'll probably just buy some cheap subs to do that a few turns and sweep what remains of the IGN out of the Pacific Ocean. It takes time, but you can see that the big difference now is the flow of men and equipment into Western Europe is now accelerating. Almost out of control. 7, 8, 9 units in Western Europe now. And that's going to require a big effort by the Germans to defeat. That's like an Eastern Front battle on the West now in terms of its size and scale. So things are kind of getting out of hand here. I am bombing Germany now strategically with the Americans. Uh, it didn't get shot down this time, so it doesn't help. Be interesting to see. I don't know if the Germans will be able to take back Western Europe. I don't think they do it easily anymore. They're also missing the Caucasus, so it's like they, instead of expanding, they're scrambling to constantly regain lost territories. It's almost like they've switched positions with Russians in that respect. Still, I mean, they're plucky, and it's really hard to whittle and break down the German player in this version of Axis and Allies. So, I mean, that's why it's a long game. That's why it's a difficult challenge, even for the Allies, when it seems like you would think that the Axis are on their way out. They can still cause problems, but you remain disciplined and you stick to the plan. Always be mindful of India and its security and strength, spoiling attacks with the Russians in the east every turn. The Allies, Western Allies, pouring men into Western Europe at an ever increasing rate and pace, and it should do the trick. Not sure what I'm going to do with the Russians here. Um, if I attack into Western Russia, I would split the Eastern Front in half. They'd have a huge gaping hole in the center with only the extreme flanks of Kazakh and Archangel intact. And put together, they would not be strong enough to take Russia. But I think I will just build in Russia. 12-minute tank, 2 men versus 5, 6 tanks, 7 men only. The problem is they have to attack the Caucasus, I believe. Otherwise, they have no ability to build close to the front. So this could be another like suicidal all attack into Russia by the German computer, but they don't tend to go that route. Okay, so they're gonna use everything they can to fight west. They're gonna lose 5 men, 9 men. It's gonna cost them 10 men to take me out of Western Europe this time. That's 30 IPCs. There's going to be 9 more men in a tank next turn. So you could see that. I mean, they're not making 60, so that's well over half their income. That turn gone. Just fighting off the Western Allies. 6, 10. Yeah, they're starting to melt. There's big weaknesses now. I could almost make progress with the British against the Germans in the southern sector of the Eastern Front. Ukraine and Kazakh are both vulnerable to the British. There's still a problem in Western Russia, no doubt. I still have to be careful. But the north is basically wide open. There's just one German division. And beyond that, nothing. The next stop is Eastern Europe. And nothing behind Ukraine either. So, and you'll notice that I can move 8 men a turn now into Western Europe with the British. And the Americans are going to follow that up too. With a man and a tank, at least. Oh, no more. 2 men, 2 tanks. So that is more than what... That would take pretty much everything the Germans have in Germany, Western Europe, and Southern Europe to repel. So the Eastern Front is going to be completely starved of resources here. They're going to be on their own. This is basically non-recoverable, I think. That's what I would tell a human player without being a jerk, and just say, like, look, I mean, do you really want to play this for 9 more turns while you slowly go backwards? That's going to secure the British counterattack in the south will secure the entire southern Eastern Front and all the way to the Balkans. Yes, the Germans will probably be able to get all of those back, not without a cost. I'm sure they will have to dismantle that concentration of units in Western Russia to deal with it, since everything in the West will have to counterattack what's going to be landed in Western Europe or Norway. I think the turns where the Germans pose like a dire threat to the Russians on the Eastern Front, I think that's over. This round, it comes to an end. You could see like a fairly spectacular collapse here. So land with the British, attack in 2 different directions, from the south, from the Caucasus. If you were the Germans, would you risk that attack from Western Russia into Russia proper with that last remaining pocket? I don't know. You might. If you lose, so what? I mean, you're going to lose anyway now, I think. But forced. Yeah, it would be close. It really would be close, and I think a human player might. That would be a warranted risk at this point. But if the computer doesn't do it, you know that the odds aren't favorable. Um, yeah, the problem is the British could. It would have to be an overwhelming victory on top of that because there are at least a few British units that could immediately take it back. And I do have a bomber, I believe, in India as well that could aid in that in the worst case scenario. Uh, yeah, I put units in Norway. That might entice the German armor to reverse its direction. It's the only thing that can reach Norway. That's German. So we'll see. We'll see if that does the trick here. That's annoying. The Japanese get lucky with their bombers. Every time I use a bomber, it gets shot down. At least they didn't cause a lot of damage. But four subs, maybe four subs every turn out of Borneo until, well, until there's no more Japanese ships. They'll have to use, they'll have to force them to spend on destroyers, which are more expensive than subs. So the Japanese are stalled out, as they have been for much of this game. In fact, they're not. I don't think they're going to be able to rescue the Germans in this case. Um, it's just not going to happen with this. Plan of attack here by the Allies. Not sure where I'm going to land the Americans. Western Europe, maybe. I get the bombardment rolls. Two bombers too. Those are the difference makers. It's good to have bombers because you can switch them from strategic to operational situations, and it's actually very convenient to do that, especially in this case where I'm kind of low on ground units, but the bombers will make a difference. And I'll get back in Western Europe again, which I mean, those back and forth battles you could see are now severely taking a toll on the Germans. Yeah, they lost 4 tanks and an artillery just for 2 men. And they have to defeat 2 tanks. So maybe 4 units dedicated, that can't, reinforce the Eastern Front, that now is in desperate need of reinforcement. So Russia, just thinking of what I can do here. 12 men, a tank, and 2 planes. I think the Western Russia pocket is still too tough to go all out against. I think that would be foolish. Yeah, that's. If they build up, maybe, yeah, then they would face 16 men, a tank, and 2 aircraft. It would be too strong to take. They just. So. Hard to decide what I want to do here. 8 subs off the coast of Borneo now. $19 to spend with the Russians. Like I said before, I always have one guy, at least one guy in each territory. So you think more inexperienced players there would probably have tried to go all out against Western Russia, but it's the more conservative, safer play is what I did there. Just keep grinding away, deploy my reinforcements right in Russia. It's too strong for Western Russia now, or it will be once I deploy my reinforcements. Even if the Germans were to attack, like I said, I have British units that could potentially take it right back. Not a lot, but enough. Barely. And that's the last German redoubt on the Eastern Front. After after this concentration of forces is destroyed, there. Okay, so they went north and they went after the British. That was the best they could hope for. Can no longer push east. And the attack into the west is successful. But yeah, the Eastern Front stripped. They're in full defense mode now. You can see each north, south, and center is held by one unit. So Germans are preparing for the worst. It's that all-out defensive strategy, as we mentioned before, which only has one outcome. People might do that if they believe the Japanese have some sort of long shot to take Russia from the other side, but not. It's not the case in this game. They are stuck right up against India. India is slightly stronger than Indochina, so every time the Japanese try to do something, I mean, they risk losing that escalation there. So there will not be a just in the nick of time rescue of Germany by Japan. They are completely blocked. And yeah, you can see the German panzers are moving west now. They're running from the Eastern Front. They just basically surrendered the Caucasus, Western Russia, and Archangel. The front line next turn will be Ukraine, Belorussia. They'll hold two because I'm going to take Karelia with the British this turn. So yeah, this is non-recoverable, unfortunately, for the Axis. You can see it. The Germans do not have the ability to mobilize enough equipment and units to stem the tide. So we're just going to skip ahead a few turns and we will see what that looks like. This is what the collapse of the Eastern Front looks like. It's just reduced to isolated pockets of German resistance. One in Russia, Belorussia completely empty. One division in the Balkans, a pocket, and now there's still a pocket in. Their German armor is kind of isolated in the Ukraine, but Archangel, Western Russia, and the Caucasus are going to be bulldozed into the ground. The Germans in those territories for sure. Still, even though the Japanese built a factory in Manchuria, I mean, they could barely exert pressure on Russia from the opposite side, and it's certainly not enough. It can be clipped and counterattacked with planes and tanks. Japan is simply not expanding at the rate it needs to in the Far East to affect any type of reversal of fortune on the Eastern Front or Western Europe. I mean, it's the fate of Germany is sealed at this point. I think you can see the sheer amount of infantry that's building up in Russia. I mean, I could just push it forward and steamroll Archangel, Western Russia, I don't even think the Ukrainian divisions, German Ukrainian divisions, can deal with it. It's so big now. The Red Army is starting to roll. There are significant British units in Eastern Europe and in Karelia. So, yeah, the writing is on the wall. And you get a chance to see how this game would end, how it would look if you chose to play it out. I don't imagine too many people will play it out to its conclusion if it gets to this type of situation. Um, I don't know. Western Russia's going to fall. Russia still has the mobility and potency to strike back against the Japanese in the Far East. So, it's no threat there. Those planes, like I said, have paid dividends. Use them correctly, they are just invaluable. So, it's just going to be slowly backwards for the Axis here. Oh, I didn't take Yakut back, but I still stopped the advance of the Japanese by 2 turns, in fact. And I'm not sure that the Germans have 2 turns left. So here's the avalanche of the tidal wave of men. It can be effective, actually. I don't like to do that unless I have at least 6 infantry. Um, but yeah, now there's a pocket of in Archangel of Germans that are completely stranded and cut off. There's no hope for them. Those units are dead. And yeah, we skipped ahead for a couple turns, and you can see how the game will end. It's just Germany left, and it's going to be the British that deliver the final blow here. You can see it. It's just too much. The balance of power, the scales have tipped too far in the direction of the Allies. Russia's in southern Europe. It's factories burning. Um, and I actually, you notice on the small map in the upper right, I did pull out of India with all of those. I built like such a massive force of British units in India that I just decided to drive them west to take Germany. Essentially, I traded the 1 star in India for the 3 in Europe. So you can do that. You have that option. Germany became so weak, you can make that trade. You could even trade Russia for Germany as the allies and still win. I feel if the situation resembles what you see here. I didn't have to do that. Germany was the 9th star. There is no way that Japan can survive on its own in this game. No matter what, like even if they have Russia, I don't think so, because Europe is worth way more. They don't have enough of Russia. They would just have their worst case scenario 8-point Russia province, but I would have Western Europe, Southern Europe, Germany. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So that's another finishing move you can try if you employ the India first strategy. You have like this huge buildup, which is beside the Japanese buildup, and then just at the right time, you can pull out of India. As long as you drive towards Berlin with it, it's like 2 turns away. You can clear the path with the Russians, and that British armor just you roll up with 22 tanks or something on the 18th turn, and that's it. Also, with strategic bombing, towards the end, it becomes more and more effective because you can basically end all of the enemy's production. You just need like 10. So 3 bombers can do it. They can put an end to your opponent at that point. They just don't build anymore. You could see I was burning. I only had 2 damage, but still, I was. That was always a factor. The strategic bombing became more and more prevalent. I had 4 bombers in Great Britain. And if you get to this point, that's 9 stars. So the game will end on America's turn if you get to this point. The Japanese, what was left of the Japanese Navy, it ran from American submarines all around the Horn of South America into the Atlantic Ocean. So you could see I had 12 subs chasing the 2 battleships and the aircraft carrier until they ran out of places to run, basically. That was funny. I chased the IGN right out of the Pacific Ocean, what was left of it, just with submarines. With the Americans, towards the end of the game, I mean, you have so much money, you have unlimited options, basically. You can do whatever you want. And yeah, Berlin only had 3 infantry divisions, 5 tank divisions, and 1 artillery, 1 plane, and that was it. That was it. I just took it with 6 infantry divisions, 5 tank divisions, artillery, and a bomber. And there you go. You can see how it's interesting, though, how the end game looks. It's Britain, Great Britain, and Russia in control of Europe. And it works. The Americans just chopped up the South Pacific, basically. You can make that division. That division of responsibility seems to work in this version of Axis and Allies. You can get away with using most of America's power against the Japanese, provided you are very careful and disciplined with both the Soviet Union and the British. You kind of stick to the plan. Don't try anything too wacky. Support India to the very end. And even a rookie player, even a inexperienced player will do well. So I hope you got something out of this video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.